Hello, everyone. My name is Said Akhtar, and welcome to the Ask the Expert session for building Zero Trust Ready apps with the Microsoft Identity Platform. We've got just a couple rules of engagement to walk through first, which is the Q&A section is open for you to go ask your questions. So go and start adding your questions now, and we've got a bunch of folks on our side that are ready to standing by, looking through questions and gonna do their best to answer them. And then just some etiquette, we are gonna record this session. Please help our moderators and keep all the comments appropriate. And we've got some code of conduct requirements. And I'll just let everyone read through that really quick. And here are the experts that we have available. So I'm just going to do some quick introductions. I'll start with myself. So I'm the lead program manager in charge of authentication libraries at Microsoft. And I also work on a lot of the developer experiences when you're building a new application or service that is trying to use identity. Jeff, you want to do a quick introduction of yourself?
Sure, thanks. Hi, everybody. I'm Jeff Sakowitz. I lead the PM team here at Microsoft that focuses on identity app platform security. We look after features like publisher verification, some of the features related to least privilege, and a bunch of other things related to building Zero Trust Ready apps.
Awesome, thank you, Jeff. Jean-Marc, do you want to do a quick introduction for you?
Yes. So hello, I'm Jean-Marc. I'm a program manager as well in the identity team in charge of SDKs and especially the .NET SDKs. So MSAL.NET, Microsoft Identity Web, and also the SDKs that do token validation. And then of course I also work on end-to-ends, especially on confidential client applications, web apps, web APIs, daemons.
Excellent, thank you. Kyle, you're up next.
Hi, everybody. I'm Kyle Marsh. I'm in our customer success group here at Microsoft Identity. And I work a lot with developers on how to best build and optimize for our platform, as well as working a lot with some of our large customers on their app development projects.
And last up, we have Kalyan, who is also on the session.
Hi everyone. My name is Kalyan Krishna. I'm a program manager in the Microsoft Identity division, focused on developer experiences and Microsoft Graph in general. Said.
Excellent, thank you. And like I said, the questions are open, and I see a couple of questions already starting to trickle in here. So in terms of best practices that you can implement right now, I'm reading one question here about the top 10 best practices in terms of implementing right now to start adopting Zero Trust. So I was thinking maybe Kalyan, maybe you can start off with some of the top best practices, and then Jeff, I'd maybe like you to weigh in on some of those as well.
Definitely, Said. So while Zero Trust is an emerging area, and so would be our documentation and guidance, I am sharing a few links here which will help you get started. Off the bat, the ones that I want to essentially call out is to make sure that you're using modern authentication protocols like OpenID and OAuth 2, because these protocols, among being the most modern in the list of protocols out there for federation, also have extensibility points that help us build additional features like continuous access evaluation, conditional access auth context, step-up authentication, and things of that nature that we have to build to address emerging threat scenarios. The second and the most common or most established one is around credential hygiene. It is some amount of effort that the developers have to take to ensure that their code does not carry any credentials at all. This is extremely important is because in case of a compromise, if it's not a user, it would be one of the credentials that your application is using. that would get compromised. In these cases, keeping credentials out of your code in a place like Key Vault allows IT administrators or automated tools that look for these kinds of compromise and take automated action or triggered action can immediately or within a certain time frame rotate your credentials to make sure that the compromised credentials are not being used anymore. These two are the ones that we would like developers to start focusing on pretty quite quick in the beginning at least. Going forward, if you are a regular user of Microsoft Graph, we had a quick demo on how to make sure that you do not start with the highest privilege permissions. Highest privilege applications, which are consented for very high privilege permissions, are often targeted by attackers first. You should take your time to make sure that the permissions that you are picking up for your Microsoft Graph API calls are the least privileged, the ones that are just the right one for your call to succeed. And we also covered another topic, which is publisher verification. It's something very applicable to developers who sell their applications to other customers. So if you are going to present your application to a customer who has an Azure Active Directory tenant and your application is asking for a number of permissions, or even if the customer is evaluating whether to provision your application in their tenant or not, getting publisher verifies helps the customer make that decision more confidently and more quickly, because it lets the customer know that not only you went through an established process, you are a verified ISV, and in case of a compromise on an issue, you are reachable via standard means of support or legality. So I would stop here and see if we have more questions from what we have presented. And I will also share a few links that would help you get started off the bat immediately. Saeed?
Yeah, Jeff, did you want to weigh in on any of the best practices or anything that Kalyan said there?
Yeah, I would. I think that was a really great overview of a bunch of important things to do. I'll add a little bit more. I won't give you any more best practices. I think that those are some great things to start with, but I will talk about some of the benefits that you can get from doing some of these things. Because when a lot of what you hear about Zero Trust is like around, making sure that your app is built securely according to Zero Trust principles and is manageable and runs well in environments that have deployed Zero Trust policies and other things. Well, I think another benefit of abiding by some of the best practices Kalyan mentioned, especially publisher verification and requesting least privilege permissions, is this can actually lower the adoption friction that your app sees, whether that is with users in your own tenant or if you're an ISV or someone else building multi-tenant apps. By abiding by those and other best practices, it actually will be simpler and easier for your app to get adoption over time. And to be specific about that, we recommend that customers only allow users to consent to a limited set of apps by using app consent policies. And we recommend that the policies they use, and these are customizable, so you'll run into different environments with different knobs turned with these settings. But in general, we recommend that end users can only consent to apps from verified publishers that are requesting low risk permissions, and admins are able to define what low risk is. So by being ready and having a verified publisher added to your app and requesting low privilege permissions, you are significantly increasing the likelihood that your app can be adopted as low friction by end users out there when it's asking permissions, across many users or across many tenants, which is a really important extra benefit here.
Yeah, I really like that. Definitely something to keep in mind if you're a software vendor is it's not just, cost of doing business. There is actually some benefits to your business of really paying attention to this and, thinking about how your customer adoption is going to improve as a result of doing this work. We've got some questions in here that relate to managing certificates and I'm paraphrasing here, but continuous integration, and there's a lot of complexity around managing, creating, deploying, and dealing with certificates, and yet we recommend them. And in the chat, we're talking a little bit about managed identities as a solution if you're deployed on Azure. I thought, Jean-Marc, if you wanted to add just a little bit more color into, why managed identities and where can it help, and do you want to take that one?
Yes, Said, I will. So yes, certificates, I think there is pushback because it's more complex indeed, and you have to rotate the certificates and you have to make sure that that works. So there are solutions for that. First, when you have a certificate, when you have a web app or a web API, a confidential client application, you need to prove the identity to Azure AD, as you know. So you have to have some kind of credentials. If it's a client secret, that's coming with the application deployed. So well, that's as it is. If it's a secret, you need to get it from somewhere, for example, Key Vault. But now the problem is, how do you get it? You need another credential to access Key Vault. The problem is solved by managed identity because it bootstraps this first getting the certificate. For instance, managed identity only does client credentials. That means getting things, tokens on behalf of the app itself. So perfect to access storage or for example, Key Vault. Now, other thing, once you have your certificate, well, it's still handled by the application indeed. So once you have your certificate, it can expire. So you need to be a bit robust to that. You might know that in Key Vault, you can do the rotation of the certificate. It can even be auto-rotated. And what happens at the application level is we have a layer for .NET named Microsoft Identity Web, which will take care of checking the certificate. So if the certificate expires, it will get back to Key Vault to get the latest version. And you can also propose several certificates, and it will do them in the order until it finds the right one. That's for the certificate credentials, so the client credentials. There are other certificates which are used when you encrypt token to do the token decryption, for which we don't have a good solution for the moment. And the last thing, managed identity. As I said, that's to do this bootstrapping. You usually consume it through the Azure SDK because that's simple. You can also consume it from Microsoft Identity Web, which is higher level. And yeah, that's it.
Excellent, thanks, Jean-Marc. And I know, Kyle, you also talk about the various options and best practices for in many of your sessions as well. So the follow-up question that I also see in the chat is that I heard certificates are more secure than secrets. So imagine that we've got a customer who is not running on Azure, and let's say on-prem or using another cloud vendor in terms of deployed resources. Why would we recommend certificates over secrets?
Yeah, sure. So the primary item here really is a question of management. Now, if you have, and I have talked to some customers who have a very sophisticated secrets management system within their enterprise, then that's fine. But generally, certificates are more secure because they tend to be better managed. There isn't another detail there that we don't actually put anything particularly useful when you use certificate authentication for your client credential apps on the wire, as opposed to actually transmitting the secret itself as part of the protocol. So there's that additional advantage in that the secret itself isn't shared, if you will. So that's a couple of the big components. Like, for example, I've talked to customers about issues they might have been having with their client credential applications, only to be brought up a spreadsheet of here are all of our secrets that we use. And it's like, well, that's not exactly a great way of securing these things. They tend to get mismanaged, etc. So the nature here of moving to a more secure system tends to be, I think I got this advice once from Jeff, what we really want to see is a system where the user, where an individual is not handling these secrets, right? So if you have a way of managing what the application needs onto the application in the right time, that's really the goal here. Because if we ask for the secret to be go through people's hands, it shows up anywhere, and that's really our biggest concern there.
Yeah, that's excellent. I see, some questions here about managed identities and support across Azure. What if, I know that you have table storage and some of the products, but not all of them. What about some of the all the various services on Azure? I will say that we do scorecard it, and we do have regular syncs with our leadership about driving consistency across the entire Azure product line. So I think you'll continue to see progress in that space. And we have a very close partnership with the Azure SDK team as well. And so I think you'll, I don't have any exact timelines to share at this moment, but I will say, stay tuned in. You'll continue to see expanding support there. I'm just going down and seeing if there's any other questions here.
There is a good question to which I don't know the answer. Indeed, when you have a subscription, zero trust means nobody owns the subscription. How do we do? That's a good question. I don't know the answer.
Yeah, I don't know. Anybody else want to weigh in on that one?
So we do have privileged identity management available for a number of scenarios like this, where you don't want an administrator role to be always populated. It just should be populated just in time and just for a right duration of time. I'm slightly behind it. I know it supports all the Azure Active Directory roles. So if you have an Azure subscription that you have given access to, let's say all your global administrators or application administrators, those could be managed via privileged identity management if you have it working in your Azure AD tenant. The extent of its support in Azure subscription is something that I need to look up. I'm going to just give an answer, more recent answer in a couple of minutes. Thank you for asking that question. It's a good one.
Yeah, it's a very good question. I'll chime in. I'm also not an expert on PIM for Azure resources, but I do know that at least at the Azure resource level, you can use privileged identity management to basically, allow just-in-time elevation to certain Azure RBAC roles in the scope of resources. I'm not exactly sure if you can do it on a per subscription basis, but you can on a per resource basis. I think to hone in on the principle there, because there could be various ways to achieve the fundamental outcome, is that you want to strive for something where you have no standing admin access. You can have folks who are able to administer that subscription or any given arbitrary set of resources. But if you can limit it to that there's no standing admin access, and you have to go through some just-in-time elevation process to actually administer those resources, that's a good solution.
So I just checked. I'm going to share the link here. The privileged identity management is fully supported with Azure resources and roles. So yeah, do give it a try and make sure that for your more high privileged roles, you do not have any standing admins all the time.
Excellent. I'm going to move on to another question here that talks about, in terms of my own resources, how do I secure them? I'm again paraphrasing. How do I secure my own resources, in preparation for zero trust? And I think, there's multiple dimensions to this, which is, defining scopes. You can register your application, your API within the Microsoft Entity Platform, and you can define scopes. So let's say you're writing we often use to-do list as an example in our samples. And so imagine that you have to-do list.read, to-do list.write, and you want to provide some granular scopes as to what you want the caller to be able to do. That's certainly a great start. We do have some things that help with this, meaning we provide libraries on the server side for doing validation of incoming tokens to make sure that they're of the correct scope. We also have some partnership with the app services team in terms of a feature that is called Easy Auth, where you can, from the portal, turn on authentication and verify that only users within your own tenant, for example, have access to that API. On the token validation side, Jean-Marc, I don't know if you have any other guidance or advice in terms of protecting your own resource API.
I think for the token validation, the idea is we do work on our SDK all the time to improve the security and the reliability. So my advice would be to just consume the latest version of, for example, identity model, Microsoft Identity Model. That's a set of NuGet packages which are usually dragged by ASP.NET Core. But you can always update the latest version. That's what I would do to be sure, because our libraries try to really stay up to date with security and resiliency.
Excellent, thank you, Jean-Marc. And then, we have some follow-up questions as to, I've got a website with an API, an Azure function. Is there a tool or a way to generate some data that would tell me what are all the components that I have and are they all following the best security practices? This is actually a scenario that we are working on with various teams within Azure. There is an Azure Security Center today. It does provide some level of recommendations of, hey, you've exposed these things publicly, but a lot of the identity recommendations is still a work in progress. Like we have something that we're working on called the Azure AD recommendations that will provide you a set of best practices. And then over time, you can expect us to maybe even provide some recommendations that would suggest, hey, did you know that you can turn on automatic validation and require sign-in in order to access this website or Azure Function API? And so I think it's definitely great feedback. It's an area that we're interested in improving.
And you can see a little bit of that today in our application integration assistant in our app registration blades too, where we can give you some best practices. We can look at your registration and see how it looks given the type of app you described to us. So we can help a little bit there as well.
Yeah, excellent. Yeah, that's a great point. I'm actually just scanning through some more questions here. One of them is just, should I be restricting access to who can create applications? And what maybe would be the advantage of doing that? And what's the right level of access there? Jeff, I don't know if you have any thoughts on, restricting permissions for creating app registrations, and what are the scenarios where you might want to do that, and how it might help in terms of security.
Yeah, I can speak to that if I can manage to unmute myself. So it's a good question, and I think the answer will depend on what your business processes and the internal governance model that you want to have in your organization around app creation. And many organizations are different here in terms of who is allowed to create applications, who is allowed to grant permissions to applications. And so what we do in the platform is we give you a set of flexible controls that you can use to kind of fine tune that to match the needs of your org. And I do want to call out that's an important differentiation there's a set of controls where you can decide who can create apps. There's another set of controls that you can decide who can actually grant permissions to apps and what types of permissions can they grant. Because a lot of times when folks ask us about this, what they're actually really concerned about is less about the act of creating the application registration in the first place, but more about the act of granting that thing permissions to some sensitive data. So the consent policies I mentioned earlier are a great solution there, where you can say by default, or not by default, in my organization, only users can only grant apps permissions to these 5 or 10 or 25 permissions, aka scopes, going forward. And you can also, again, like I said, customize those policies as you see fit for your org based on different characteristics. That said, if you do want to constrain who can actually create applications, there are options here as well. So there's kind of a big binary on-off switch you can use that says end users, non-admin users cannot register applications, and you can flip that switch if you would like to. If you want to restrict end user app creation, but you do have a set of folks you do want to be able to create apps and manage apps going forward, there are a number of roles you can put those people in order to give them the flexibility, more flexibility than the default end user in the tenant. So there is an app developer role, which is going to be useful here, that lets users create apps. It does grant them some elevated permissions to consent to certain things, even if user consent is disabled. So just please, review the docs and be aware of what comes along with that app developer role. And then if you want someone who's actually going to be managing apps tenant-wide, in addition to creating apps, you can look at things like application administrator, cloud application administrator. Those are a little more powerful, which is okay if that's the sort of role that person plays in the organization. But again, I urge you to check out the docs and just review the different things those roles can do. And last but certainly not least, if you really want to take the hood off and start tinkering and customizing something to really match your org's needs, we do support custom roles for app management in the Azure AD RBAC model. So you can go in and create custom roles, and you can really get into fine tuning. Who can do what in terms of app creation, and you can kind of combo that with the consent policies to get a really, really precise model implemented in your org, if that's what you're looking for.
And Kyle, I know you work with a lot of organizations as well. I'm curious if you have any thoughts on, the app developer role and, whether organizations are evaluating it and, how they think about rolling it out, and any concerns or thoughts there?
Yeah, actually, just to add on to one of the things Jeff mentioned, an application registration itself can't do anything. Right, so looking at an app registration, so for example, I've gone into organizations where they don't even allow the developers to see their app registration, and that can lead to issues because if I have a mismatch between my redirect URI, I can't go and see what's in the portal, right? So that can be a challenge, but the app registration itself doesn't necessarily provide a lot of capability. It's the consent that Jeff mentioned, where we have a lot of very interesting and fine-grained controls over that process. So I would suggest that there are the custom roles that Jeff mentioned, the ability to tailor a particular developer to be able to modify their app registrations, remembering that app can't move past what it's been consented to until the IT folks decide, yes, you can use this new permission or not. So I think that's a really interesting place to start looking is around that item.
Excellent. Yeah, thank you. Well, it looks like there are still some questions on secrets, and this one has to do more of around the alerting and our capabilities of knowing that, hey, I've got a certificate or a secret, but maybe it's about to expire. I don't know, Jeff, could you maybe talk through a little bit of, the maybe experiences that we have today and maybe what we're working on in that space in order to help folks keep track of all these secrets that they have within their organization and whether they're, in compliance in terms of age or other dimensions of that problem?
Yeah, absolutely. So this is an area where we know we've heard a lot of feedback, and we know that we can do more as the platform to help here. So Today, the capabilities here that you have to keep track of secret expiry or certificate expiry, or how strong of a credential your apps across your portfolio are using. They're largely things that the raw data is available and that you can get through Graph APIs or PowerShell, and you can build reports. But we've heard feedback that folks want more. So, and I know we're wrapping up on time here, so I will be as brief as possible. First thing we're doing is more fine-grained policies that let you control up front what types of credentials apps and service principals can use, what the maximum lifetime is of those things. For new credentials added to new apps. And then we will extend that in the future to have runtime policies as well. In addition, we're working on a bunch of features that are still under development, but will help you be more informed through more insights rather than just the raw data that we have today around when credentials are about to or nearing expiration, when you have credentials that are unused or have been stale for a long period of time. So there is a bunch of work in progress here.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Yeah, we are out of time, but thank you for all the rich discussion, and be sure to check out the other resources that we called out in the session. Thank you all.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.